My journey through graduate education was filled with unique challenges that extended far beyond academic rigor. I had financial problems due to being unable to work. I went through a pretty messy divorce and generally felt like the other PhD students in my cohort were a lot smarter and better at research. Emotionally and psychologically, I was not in a good place. Today, we're exploring how the psychological impacts of graduate school, like the imposter phenomenon, affect graduate students. I'm joined by Dr. Jonathan Cisco and Dr. Jayme Cisco, co-founders of the Grad Academy, whose groundbreaking work is transforming how institutions approach graduate student development. Doctors Cisco, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start by talking about imposter phenomena. Your journey into graduate school development began with exploring imposter phenomenon, and it's something I've noticed affecting graduate students that I work with in my teaching roles. It affected me in all of my graduate programs. Can you unpack what this phenomenon really is and why it's such a critical factor in graduate education?
Yeah. And thanks again, Ray. So imposter phenomenon sometimes is called imposter syndrome, especially kind of in the blogosphere. It refers to this overwhelming feeling of being an intellectual fraud, that any success that I might have had was a result of blind luck or some insignificant quality, anything other than my own intellectual abilities. So there's like, there are so many correlates to, I'm going to call it imposter phenomenon, which started, like the research started in clinical psychology in the late 80s. But lots of correlates of this innate feeling of really needing to be the very best in a situation, which kind of lends itself to then superhuman standards. And so that might kind of manifest with just these extraordinary standards one puts on oneself. So I remember a student, for example, where and you read this, or if you remember this, the student wrote notes that exceeded the length of an article, for example, that he was, that kind of stuff. Maybe not that extreme, but it's those kinds of high level standards, right? And then it leads to a fear of failure and a fear of exposure. Some of the qualities that we've also noticed, and this shows in the literature as well, is there's kind of an incredible ability to deny abilities or discount praise. We do this culturally anyway, but it's, hey, Ray, you did a great job there. And then it's oh, well, it's because of this, or, oh, it's because of that, or there was, or a great job getting that position. Yeah, well, they didn't have a whole lot of candidates. And so there's some cultural elements of that, sure. But this tends to be something that people that are suffering from imposter feelings really start to get very, very good at, and discounting any praise of any sort. And then that, of course, then brings us to graduate students, where graduate students are in a very unique position to experience imposter feelings, because you are, in the case of graduate school, you were quite literally put on stage and to demonstrate your intellectual prowess.
Yeah, and in some programs, it can kind of feel competitive with your peers. You might be competing for assistantships or research positions. Who has the most publications by the time you graduate? All those kinds of things actually pits you against your peers. And so there's this constant feeling of evaluating, how am I doing compared to everyone else around me? And, oh, they seem to understand that article better than I did. And it's always that opportunity to kind of feel like you don't belong and that you're not doing well enough.
That's right. It's like the early research, which I think that had nothing to do with graduate students, but was really interesting. They called it the imposter cycle. And it was this idea that the person that's feeling like an imposter, you're waiting for that one project or that one experience that will finally prove that you are not an imposter, right? That you are capable. So inevitably you perform well, but it didn't feel real. And so then you increase your standards to achieve the real success, and on we go.
Yeah. Like I got a publication, and then you find out one of your peers just got published in Science. Like, oh, well,
right.
It wasn't in Science, And so then there's always that bar is always raising.
Yeah. And I remember this in my PhD program where even after I got published, I thought that this wasn't very good. And thank goodness they didn't realize how bad this is. And even after finishing my dissertation, I mean, getting the feedback, like, you passed with revisions. is like, oh God, I have revisions to do. It wasn't a very good dissertation. You forget the I passed part, which was the ultimate goal of the PhD program. And it is interesting to see how emotional students can get, and how it impacts their student success when they're kind of afraid that this is not what I'm not good at this. I can't do this. I'm being stretched too far. And I want to double click on something you mentioned about looking at the data. So if we think about graduate student success writ large, this is clearly a part of what we can see demonstrated in the data around challenges that students face. I'm curious what other factors impact students that might even surprise some experienced educators.
It seems to me that with imposter feelings in graduate school, you might come in with kind of any of these tendencies or any of these correlates outside of grad school, but it's usually the grad school experience itself, I would argue, that tends to induce these feelings. Yeah. We see this all the time because when we do a Grad Academy, for example, so that all-day workshop, we used to tell administrators that the best people to come to this workshop are those that already have a semester of graduate school under their belt. It's not for people that they haven't yet started, and they would get great stuff out of it, I'm sure. But it's almost like you need to realize, you need the reality of what a graduate school experience can be to understand that before you start feeling those actual imposter feelings. Is that making sense?
Yeah. It's expectations. Yeah. There's so much, so you don't know what you don't know, right? So a lot of students a little bit into their career are starting to realize, oh my goodness, I don't realize how the extent to which I'm expected to do this type of writing or that type of research. And I know a lot of students, we always survey students as well and ask, what things are you struggling with and what things surprised you? What were your expectations going into graduate school? And I think a big one that causes imposter phenomenon feelings in students is a mismatch of their expectations. Yeah. That a lot of these students were top of their undergraduate classes. Often they did very, very well. And they feel like, oh, I'm strong. I got into this great program and great, I'm ready to go. And then they're put in a group of other also very stellar students. And oftentimes faculty are teaching the content of their discipline, and they're not teaching necessarily the processes of academia. And I think that is what you found to be one of the biggest causes, the
primary causes
of imposter phenomena, is actually just realizing that you don't have the skill set, and you're very afraid to be exposed that you don't have the skill set. So seeking out the opportunities to build those skills, it's hard because you don't really know early on what you don't know. And so I think that was a big thing in your research early on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what led to the formation of the Grad Academy.
Well, let's talk about the Grad Academy, because this is really fascinating to me, and I'd love to understand. I wish I had that, frankly, when I was a grad student. Walk me through how this came to be and what need you were seeing that could be filled by what you're doing.
Graduate school, I think, is difficult for anyone. I don't care how smart or capable you are. It's a lot. And like you had mentioned, Ray, you were running into like financial challenges as well on top of just, grad school stuff. I found when I was getting my master's degree first, I found that exceedingly difficult, particularly the reading. So I was in political science at the time, and I found the reading of journal articles to be just stress inducing. And then, of course, if you're in a rigorous program, it's kind of 5 articles per course, and you're having however many courses, and that's every single week. And so you're trying to take notes on all of those, trying to understand. There's an assumed knowledge on part of an article that you obviously do not have, both from a theoretical view to methodological to all of those kinds of things. So you're really coming in with so little knowledge, where the writer is expecting a ton. And then, like Jayme said, you're put against each other oftentimes with your other cohort. When I was getting into my doctoral work in education, it was almost kind of like recognizing a pattern amongst the students, of seeing that, like Jayme was referring to, is less about the content. Like, we were learning the content, but it seemed like what was causing us the biggest challenge was, how do I read this thing properly? How much time am I supposed to take reading it? How do my faculty breathe with all of this reading that they must do? And then now I got to start writing about it. How do I write about it? And so it has nothing to do with the content, you're naturally a novice in that sense, and you'll learn. But it's how do we read? How do we write? How do we think and talk about these things? And so for me, it was very lucky that my degree was, I was focusing on literacy skills in higher education. And I realized, oh, all of these things that my peers and myself are feeling relate to literacy skills. So maybe there's something there.
These are things that nobody else is talking about.
Mm.
So when you're in class,
Right.
everybody's talking about the content, right? And trying to tease out these theories and epistemologies and all these ologies, right? No one's talking about how long did you spend reading this article? How are you organizing all of this? Are you drowning in sources? How are you going to come up with the next new idea that you're supposedly supposed to publish on, even though you're first year in a graduate program? You know, those things are kind of taken for granted that you know, which of course you couldn't know.
Mhm.
But then that induces imposter phenomenon feelings because you think, I must be the only person who doesn't know this. Everybody else is nodding, doing this kind of head nod with the finger on your chin kind of thing, right? Yeah. That thing that you do
Oh,
at
yes.
conferences. Right. Exactly.
Very
You know,
interesting.
and so, you know, nobody else is talking about this. So it's this feeling that I must be stupid. I must have missed something. Maybe I don't belong here. I'm not prepared, or I would already know how to do this because clearly I'm supposed to know how to do this.
Yeah.
And we both experienced that in graduate school. We both had moments in our programs where we thought, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm going to make it. It just, everybody else seems to know what's going on.
And at the time, we should mention, at that time, the whole idea of imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome was not part of the headspace of graduate
Yeah.
students. Now it is. In like preliminary surveys, we found that 70 to 90% of graduate students we were sampling suffered from imposter phenomenon feelings. And I say suffered in particular because that was, everyone feels like an imposter at some point. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when it literally affects the choices that you make. And I think just as importantly, if not more importantly, people that are really suffering from these feelings tend to be unable to enjoy their own inevitable success. And that is what really is scary, you know?
It's amazing. You're hitting so many nerves thinking about this. And I'm sure many graduate students and academics who are listening to this feel the same way. There's a bitterness to the finish line. It's funny, you talk about reading. I never wanted to get a law degree because I felt I couldn't do all the reading, and then I ended up getting a PhD in rhetoric.
Oh, no.
And truthfully, okay, so this book, Kenneth Burke is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century on rhetoric, and Rhetoric of Motives is his best known book. I still can't read this. I still have it, and it's practically unread. And I've tried, and this was a book that I've highlighted a little bit. This was a book that people in my PhD program took as like a Bible. They knew it chapter and verse. And for me, having never studied this before, the reading was so dense. I can't even read this. How could I discuss it? And I would sit there doing exactly what you said. I would be nodding. So I'm so fascinated by the Grad Academy. I mean, when you do this, what kind of transformations have you witnessed with students who participated? What are the outcomes? Are there any stories you can share about like how this helped students get through some of that?
I think at this point we've done, I mean, it's been over 1,000 for sure, graduate students. I'm guessing we're in the 1,500 to 2,000 graduate students over the last decade or so. From a quantitative perspective, I'm very excited to say that all Grad Academy participants, so 100%, have recommended it to their colleagues. So that is a consistent message. Like you had said earlier, right? It was like, I wish I had this. Often we'll have like somebody that's dissertating, and they'll say, where were you
Wish I had
when
this sooner.
when I first started?
Yeah.
Which is great. We talked about it. There were two people come to mind. One's this was quite a while ago. I think it was the first cohort of the Grad Academy, and then one relatively recently. The first one, she was a top graduate student in her program, absolutely brilliant, the kind of person that everyone else was really surprised when she walked in the room. They're like, why is she here? You know, so I think she had published very well. She's brilliant, but her imposter phenomenon scores were by far the highest in the cohort. Imposter feelings, the big ones, tend not to affect the people that are just getting by. It tends to be the people that are very, very capable, which is what makes them imposter feelings all the more dangerous. And shouldn't the blogosphere really kind of, oh, you'll get over it, and oh, it's not that big of a deal. I completely disagree with that, because we've seen it. But this gal, she went through the Grad Academy, and now she's a successful professor at a prestigious university. She'll know who she is. And
Hopefully she's listening.
yeah, so that was one. That was the first time I realized, I think, that, oh wow, we've got something here.
And the kind of feedback that we get
Yeah.
after the Grad Academy is always, I mean, we always feel so humbled and honored to get to work with students, because
Yeah.
during the Grad Academy, we cry together.
Yeah.
We bare our souls about our fears and our failures and our insecurities. And it creates this cathartic experience where everyone realizes, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person that feels this way.
Yeah.
And that's the first step to dealing with imposter phenomenon
That's
feelings,
right.
which Jonathan discovered in his research, that first you group people together and you have people realize that this is a thing. You take it seriously. And then from there, you can start to chip away at the things that you don't know that are causing the feelings.
Mm.
So in the Grad Academy, we go over reading skills. So not just reading, but how do you read a journal article and how do you not drown? How can you do this effectively and efficiently? Writing, managing your research workload, organizing research.
Yeah.
And the students usually come away with these comments about how they felt like I mean, really, we have people in tears. We have people
Yeah,
saying they're
it's
going to
common.
therapy, people who are
Yeah.
on medication for
Yeah.
depression,
Yeah.
people who are dealing with substance issues because they just can't cope with the stress and the standards that they feel are put on them. And if I quit, I'm a failure. But if I keep going, I'm probably going to fail. And so it's this horrible quagmire. And people at the end of the day are just crying and saying, oh my gosh, I feel like I can do it now. I have a path forward. And it's really
something.
it's an emotional
Yeah.
experience. I mean, every single time we do it, it's a boot camp. It's all day long,
Yeah.
and we just go strong. And it's it's not death by PowerPoint, as Jonathan
No.
always says. It's an exchange with everyone, and at the end of every day, it's very emotional.
It's like the reading. We teach a series of methods grounded in empirical research and literacy on how to engage with a difficult article. And we don't just teach it, but one of our favorite things that we've done from the beginning, despite all of the iterations of the Grad Academy, was I'll select a journal article at random, or Jayme will, and we'll make the other one read it aloud using these strategies. So we set a timer for 20 minutes and have one of us use the techniques that we've shared to demonstrate how quickly you can get at the point of an article.
The point of the Grad Academy was after he did his dissertation, and he created a version of this for his dissertation to say, what is imposter phenomenon? How can you deal with it? And so going through this group and really, testing, does it work? Do imposter phenomenon scores lower after you group students together and teach them this? This is really a boot camp. Teach them the raw skills that they need to have that are inducing all those feelings. And inevitably, in every case, imposter phenomenon scores improve every time.
If you look across the disciplines, it was a 50% attrition rate, a kind of flip of a coin on whether or not a grad student's going to drop. Given if you're an administrator of a big university, that's tens of thousands of dollars sunk costs there, right? Not to mention, obviously, what could have happened, grant dollars, all of that stuff. And that's just the financial argument. There's a moral argument here, I think, that if we're going to bring graduate students in, we should ensure that they can focus on the things that they really won't need to focus on, rather than this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And the bottom line is the administrators who help bring that student to the institution, the faculty who select that student for their program, they all want that student to be successful. And they're being selective because they're assuming that the criteria, the metrics they're using mean that this student will be successful. But there's this other layer that seems inherent. So, I mean, this is resonating, I'm sure, with a lot of listeners. And I'm curious, for listeners who are intrigued by what they're hearing, how can students connect with this resource? And what should administrators know if they want to bring this to their institution?
Yeah, our favorite way of doing this is either we can do it via Zoom or we can do it face-to-face. Schedule an all-day Grad Academy.
Usually on Saturdays.
Usually on Saturdays to make sure. And so usually from, what is it, like 9 to 3, those students tend to stay until 4 to chat. Lots of breaks in between and all of that. And so they can connect with us. Probably the easiest way is go to thegradacademy.com. They can connect us that way, or shoot us an email or whatever, and we can sort out what works best for you. How many students do we want to do it Zoom or face to face?
We've worked with individual departments, so it'll be a college of education, for example, at an institution, or we've worked through graduate schools where they'll open it up to students all over campus to come for the day. It's usually a pretty intimate group, so we've not typically had more than 50 at a time, although there's a lot of sharing that happens. There's a lot of skill building. There's a lot of workshopping throughout it. So it's not like a big, just, talky presentation to 500 people kind of thing.
No.
The thing about imposter phenomenon is that you can experience it over and over in your life, right? So when I became a parent, I was slammed with imposter phenomenon, right? I thought I read all the baby books, but I don't know how to get them stuff right. Oh my gosh. Okay. When you finish graduate school and you start as a faculty, you're probably going to experience imposter phenomenon again, right? Now you're a faculty member. How do I mentor students? How do I do this, right? And on it goes. But once you go through this and you realize this is why I'm feeling this way, and all I have to do is figure out the skills I need. Yeah. And I can do that. Yeah. I can hack this, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the point of the Grad Academy. And that's why we feel really strongly that, there are some amazing programs that we've worked with, amazing graduate schools who have all these amazing resources. We have, we have resume writing, and we have writing boot camps and all these kinds of things. But the Grad Academy is different. It is not a collection of various seminars that students can go to. It is an all-day intensive where we ground all of those skills in the idea that these are causing these feelings that you can overcome if you just have the growth mindset of these are feelings that come from a lack of skills. What are the lack of skills? I can learn them. And then every time imposter phenomenon hits you again in your life, it's like, oh, okay, calm down. I'm not a failure. Yeah. I'm not an idiot. I can do this. This is imposter phenomenon. I need to figure out what I don't know. Where can I go to find those skills?
It's really incredible, and I'm so excited for the work that you're doing. Dr. Jonathan Cisco, Dr. Jayme Cisco, co-founders of the Grad Academy. Good luck with what you're doing, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ray. Always appreciate it.
So here's my take. As a faculty member, as a graduate student, imposter phenomenon is something I've seen affect dozens of students, even the most brilliant graduate students. That persistent feeling that you don't belong, or that you somehow fooled everyone into thinking you're capable and belong there. It's so universal. That really fascinates me. Yet how isolating it feels is really a challenge and impacts graduate student success. I'm so thrilled to hear about what the doctors Cisco are doing with the Grad Academy, moving beyond simply identifying a problem to exploring concrete solutions, moving beyond just saying, well, this is something that happens to everybody, but actually empowering students to address it. Graduate education in the United States and around the world is at a crossroads. There are unprecedented pressures from technology, from AI, mental health challenges, rapidly evolving job market. We need innovative approaches like the Grad Academy that address the whole student experience, not just academic preparation.